This week's episode is sponsored by Godox.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host.
Welcome, listeners. I'm Derek Fosbender, the new host of the B&H Photography Podcast.
And I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast's senior creative producer.
And I'm Mike Weinstein, the show's technical producer and audio engineer.
The world of professional sports photography has long been a landing zone for many of our industry's most skilled individuals. It's a world full of high-octane excitement, pressure, and technical challenges that requires a specific breed of photographer to reliably capture every ounce of emotion, from the bitter disappointments to the exaltation of victory. Given this premise, we'd like to start today's show with an update about a recent listener tip. Our episode on the Summer Games in Paris from earlier this year prompted listener Cessna 6535 to suggest we do a future show on photographers who cover competitive cycling races like the Tour de France. This tip sent us off on a whirlwind search of our photography contacts, which led us to the two amazing photographers you're going to hear from in a few moments. Thanks so much for the great idea, Cessna 6535, and to all our other listeners, please keep the suggestions coming. We welcome your input either via email or at our home under the podcast tab on the B&H Photos YouTube page. We couldn't do this show without you, and we are truly thankful for your engagement. Now, on to our guests. Kristof Ramon is a pro cycling photographer who covers some of the world's most prestigious races, including the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, the Tour of Flanders, and Paris-Roubaix. Born and raised in Belgium, Kristof discovered photography while attending film school at age 19. He eventually followed his passion for cycling and photography and has focused exclusively on this sport since 2011. Working under the name Ramon, his talent for storytelling and his ability to capture the atmosphere and raw emotion of racing makes his images stand out from typical race photography. Kristof's reputation has earned him the respect and trust of many of the biggest racing teams and riders, which is why he's able to capture such extraordinary in-between moments and behind-the-scenes images. The riders are always his primary focus, as evidenced in his close-up portraits of racers caked in sweat, mud, dust, snow, and grime. Kristof's first book, The Art of Suffering, was released in June by Lawrence King Publishing. British-born, New York-based photographer Phil Penman has documented the ever-changing scene of New York City streets for more than 25 years. And he has quite a bit of experience in the world of professional cycling himself. In his career as a news and magazine photographer, Phil has photographed major public figures and historical events. His reportage following the 9/11 terrorist attack was featured in major print publications and media broadcasts worldwide, and his work covering New York City's pandemic lockdown is in the collection of the U.S. Library of Congress. In addition to exhibiting at Leica galleries in New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, and London, Phil's signature street photography has appeared in international exhibitions as far afield as Venice, Berlin, and Sydney. He also tours the world teaching photo workshops for Leica Academy. Phil's books Street, published in 2019, and New York Street Diaries, published in 2023, both became bestsellers and have been featured at New York's Museum of Modern Art. Phil Penman and Kristof Ramon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Derek.
Thanks, Derek. Good to speak to you again.
Good to have you guys on. Now, Kristof, I know, we have all the work right there. We have the new book. The cycling thing is apparent. Phil, some of your newer fans or people who are familiar with your current work might not know about your past in the cycling world. You had the photo bug back in England. You had gotten a job for a local newspaper after your college studies. But I want to know, when did the passion for competitive cycling manifest itself?
So it all came about from being way too overweight and drinking too much in too many bars, to be honest. That's the New York way. It was also a little bit like in my old world, I was in the newspaper industry, and you either had two vices. Unfortunately, it was like a lot of guys turn to drugs or you're alcoholic. So I kind of went down the second path and found myself at like 210 pounds and need to get fit again. I was always kind of a sports person anyway. So took up cycling, and being my addictive nature, just got totally caught up in it. I think within like 1 year, I was already taking off to like the Tour de France. Like you ride the pre-routes before the pros would do it, like a couple of hours before. You got into competitive cycling, raced. I was the New York State time trial champion. Yeah, just it's very, very addictive. I had these two loves in my life. One of them required me to get up at like 4 a.m. and train. It's kind of crazy because I used to do like 95, 100 miles training before I would go to work doing photography every day.
Wow.
So it's a very passionate sport. It's definitely a hard man's sport as well.
Interesting. And according to your stats on roadresults.com, you logged more than 100 races from 2008 to 2017. 9 years as a competitive cyclist. That's impressive.
Yeah, that's just the stuff that's logged. Like I said, it's very, very addictive. And then, believe it or not, like in 2015, I needed to get out of the news industry. I actually took a job working, selling cycling clothing for a company called Castelli, which is like an old Italian brand.
Okay.
And yeah, I worked for them for like 3 years whilst I was building up my career as a street photographer.
Interesting. I want to go to the photographing side of this thing. You know, you have the cycling experience. How does your insight as a professional competitive cyclist translate to your approach to photographing it?
Well, I think it's important that you have like a good insight into the sport because you know what the certain riders, what they're going to do, you know, when the breakaway is going to go, you know, breakaway being like the guys, like the ruler guys who would, you know, they take off and basically you're gambling, you know, you're going from the gun. I'd say probably one of the most exciting parts of the race, believe it or not, is probably the first 10 to 20 miles. They never used to show it on TV. Now they do. But it'd be like those guys who'd be gambling to get away and try to win solo at the end. So you kind of needed to know who those guys were, who was going to try to attempt for the day. You kind of always had a little bit of an idea of who was going to do that. Like I remember the famous Floyd Landis race when he kind of took off solo. And the thing was, it was like no surprise. Everyone knew he was going to do it. So it's good to understand the sport, how it all works, so you're kind of prepared for it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that always escapes me is these races are so long. And hearing you talk about that, it's one thing to know the sport, to know the riders and kind of have some idea who's going to be in what position, but just the logistics of it. I mean, in a race where it's not an out and back, how are you positioning yourself? Are you guys hopping on bikes? Are you in chase cars? How do the logistics function?
Oh, it's completely insane. Just the whole Tour de France. So you'd either be on the back of a motorbike or you'd be like in a car. Believe it or not, when I was doing like a lot of the local stuff, I would ride myself because it's kind of like training. So people have seen me on videos, kind of a little bit psycho, but I would do these things where I'd have a Leica hanging from my neck. I used to do a lot of feature work. We did a ride from NYC to Montreal. It was like 450 miles over 4 days. And I would photograph the riders, sprint up ahead, get off my bike, photograph the riders. And it was like this constant, you know, doing about 110 miles a day on the bike with a camera around your neck, trying to document these other guys on the bike. So that was one of the crazier things that I did.
That's perfect interval training, though.
Oh, incredible. It's like you gain your threshold tempo stuff all the time. So I do that. The biggest worry was that you would fall down and break your camera.
And when you fall down with a Leica, it's not like you just have a little point and shoot camera, iPhone. It's quite an investment you got hanging around your neck as you're riding around chasing.
I never said I was smart.
There's always that danger when you cover cycling races is your gear. Because if you're on the back of the motorbike or dangling from the trunk of a car, shooting riders, you can lose lenses or cameras easily. At home, I have a camera graveyard of 15 years covering cycling races. So it actually exists.
That's amazing. Is it like trophies or is it all just stacked up?
Yeah, it feels like trophies. To be honest, it's like I've got these old D4 cameras, which cost like thousands of euros. Well, yeah, if they're worth that much, then at least I want to still look at them and say like, well, these are badges of honor or something like that.
Mhm. Is there any safeguards you guys take? I mean, are you extra harnessed down, double strap, or is there no avoiding it?
Being on the back of a motorbike a lot of the time, I avoid wearing traditional straps. I use those, I don't know, the R straps, or it's like X kind of straps where you sort of buckle up
Okay.
two cameras at the same time and they can get off of you. Because some of my colleagues actually do it with traditional camera straps, and I still don't know how they or their cameras survive that way.
I'm here and I'm like, okay, I'd be worrying about the gear. I'm not even thinking about the creative aspect. I mean, you guys are either, you just said it, in between 110 miles on the back of a motorbike, you're in an escort car. None of this sounds like standard issue, traditional stand on the sidelines sports photography. So I want to kind of dive into the creative aspect. Number one, you have to clearly be conditioned to do what you guys do. You can't live a sedentary lifestyle, sit on the sidelines, and run around to get the pictures you're going to make. So are most of these photographers in that kind of condition, or is everybody kind of rushing? Is it like a running of the bulls every time you guys are out photographing these events? Or do you have those standard photographers who are just sedentary, sitting in a stationary position?
I think like in everyday life, there's all kinds of photographers in all sizes and measurements. So even cycling photographers come in all sizes. And maybe it helps being fit as a general thing in life. So maybe I'm a little bit faster being fit because I sometimes have to run after a guy that just won a big race. And I want to be one of the first ones to capture the post-race emotions. And those guys just finish at 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers an hour. And if you want to reach them, you have to run a pretty solid sprint to get there relatively early before the hustle and bustle of the scrum prevents you from doing so.
Mm. And as far as the shots that you guys are looking at, Phil, I want to hear from you as well. When you guys are lining up a photo, I mean, going into any sport, you kind of, as you alluded to, Phil, you have to know the sport. You have to know the riders. This obviously gives you a leg up. You know what to expect in some regards. So you can kind of start putting the story together in your head. I guess for lack of a better term, is there a shot list that you have, or is there shots that you know, or stories that are extra meaningful in each race that you know you want to grab these moments?
The way that I've kind of always taught myself is like, I look at the way that everyone else is doing it, what they're doing, how they're lining up, and then do completely the opposite to what they're doing. Because I came from like the celebrity world. It was like, why are you going to try and compete with someone that's already got it? And they could be working for Getty, they could be working for AP. Most of the publications, they have subscriptions with these services anyway. So you had to think outside the box. So for me, it was always like, how can I get something different from this that someone else is not going to do? I was fortunate that I got to do like a lot of the behind the scenes stuff where I'd have access that other people couldn't get as well. So having worked for Castelli, we sponsored a lot of the big teams around the world. One of the teams that we had was Team Sky. And at the time, they were kind of winning everything. So, every night I'm getting to eat with David Brailsford, going out with them, and you kind of like got the inside track as well. I remember like one of my favorites was we went out on a training ride and I'm dangling out the side of a car. Don't try this at home, people. We're in like sunny Mallorca, and out of nowhere, this snowstorm kicks in and we're riding through this snowstorm. I'm dangling out the side of the car and I'm just photographing. And I'm thinking, this driver better be good. And I turn around and the guy's holding an iPhone and he's turned around trying to take pictures of the guys as well.
Yikes.
And I realized that we're getting very close to the rocks at this point. But you get these incredible pictures, and it was really nice. Like at the end of it, a few of the riders, they all want to come around the back of the laptop and see what you've got. And then they're saying to Brailsford, oh, like Phil got these incredible pictures of us. And for me, it's like these guys get photographed all the time. So I know that I've kind of done something right if they're happy with it.
Phil, I completely agree with you that one of the ways to make yourself distinctive is either to shoot other things than the big agencies shoot, because you and me are freelance photographers. I think that's important to note. So the agency photographers are there to get all the results out as soon as possible. As soon as a rider wins the race, that picture needs to be out and the highlights of the race need to be out immediately. But if you can shoot things from a different angle, from a different perspective, from a different viewpoint, probably also by knowing the riders, getting intimate with them and having that privileged access that you talk about, it helps to give a unique look that goes beyond the racing. And as you just mentioned, I completely recognize the fact that I know by now, doing this for 15 years, a lot of the riders, and one thing that they're really proud of is the way they suffer. And my book is called The Art of Suffering for a reason, because the lengths they go through to achieve their goals of becoming a professional cyclist, so many stages of suffering in the race, before the race, after the race. The riders themselves are almost obsessed by you as a bystander or a photographer. If you can catch the way they are suffering and show it to them, it makes them proud because they know, like, this is what we're doing and this is what people need to see. It's not always just the racing, it's the preparation, the training rides in the snow, like you just mentioned, Phil. Stuff like that. If you don't photograph it, people don't realize how hard it is. And if you can show that to the riders themselves and to the people out there, you'll have their full support. And next time you come along for a training ride, they'll be happy to have you there because you sort of document what they do. And they're proud of it, as they should be. So I'm completely with you on that, Phil.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how tough the sport is. Like, I always laugh when I'm watching like soccer, football. You see people go down on the ground, like screaming that they've been hurt. In cycling, like I'm full of nuts and bolts. Like I've got broken hip, broken collarbone. You go down and the first thing you're thinking about is I got to get back on my bike as quickly as possible because I can't lose any time. Which is completely opposite. So you've got these guys finishing the race with broken collarbones, trying to figure out how the doctor's going to patch them up overnight so they can start again the next day. It is probably one of the most grueling sports you can think of. And I think TV doesn't necessarily get that across as much as it is. Also, you don't see just the hard work that goes in behind the scenes, like the teams, all the work that goes in there. And then also like the preparation these guys have to do, like 8-hour days in the winter training, like, and you're on the road for most of the year, you're racing.
How much time are you guys putting in on that training? You know, Phil, obviously we talked about your time with Team Sky, and in looking at your book, Kristof, there's a lot of, and I think that's what draws me in, is the non-racing moments. It is the agony. And that's something that, as Phil said, for the casual viewer who probably comes across cycling when the Tour de France is on TV and it's showing highlights, it's showing a clip of the winner. How much time are you guys putting in behind the scenes? And Kristof, specifically in working on this project, were you putting in extra time in building that rapport with these people?
Oh, it's not just extra time, it's all the time.
Wow.
It's all consuming. That's why I needed to get this book out. I needed to show what I have seen in the past 15 years building up to this moment. The TV gives you the race itself. There's several sports that are extremely popular, even in the US. But I think the thing as a photographer, the absolute extra value that you can bring is to show what is behind that or next to that or parallel stories that go with the race, because everybody looks at the racing or at the game or whatever the focus of the sport is. So if you can capture that in an original way, that's already a plus. But the real extra plus that you can bring is what happens when the cameras are not there, when you're just in a hotel room. One of the 200 nights in a hotel room those riders spent all over the world. And I am sometimes privileged enough to be allowed in to see when they're being massaged or having tea or just playing cards or whatever they're doing, boring themselves or getting attended to after one of the many crashes they have throughout the career. So if you can document that and bring it out, that brings super extra value. And that's what drives me, because I love these guys. I love their motivation. I love their passion for what they do. It's like I can finally show more then just online, I'm super proud I can show it in the book because that's the extra value I can give now. And that's what still motivates me. And what I see in Phil's work is similar because it documents those little moments in between. And I can relate to that. I recognize them so well. I know a lot of the people. That's another aspect of cycling photography that is unique, I think. There's about 200 to 300 professional cyclists. And there's about 400 to 500 professional people that surrounds them. And there's like 50 to 100 media people that go around the world. We see each other almost on a weekly basis all around the world. Imagine your life spending 200 nights per year in a hotel room. That's nuts. That's absolutely bonkers.
That's crazy.
So documenting that is important.
I'm curious about whether there's a difference between the training rides and the races in terms of your access and what you can photograph and the kind of pictures you can get. Does that differ?
Immensely. Either I'm with the team to document them, or I know them very well, so I can sort of be in the team car or from the back of the motorbike, or you go the Wednesday or the Thursday before Paris-Roubaix, and you just go on the course, and you know every team will be doing a recon ride of the course, so you can sort of go along, wait at a certain spot for them to pass by, and then you can follow them for a little bit. That differs, because then you work like from the side, but you can also work from within, so you can follow them from the team car. That's why I like a lot of the pictures that are just taken from the team car, because it's the one perspective that even as a photographer I don't control, because I'm just behind them, before them. But then I just focus on the car, being the people that follow these riders, the coaches and the soigneurs or the mechanics, and portray them doing their job. And sometimes the rider comes by the window and you just snap a picture of that. It's so diverse. It's a great palette to have as a photographer because we move all the time.
It's interesting. Now, as far as developing a personal style, is that you had said it earlier. One thing that stuck out to me, Kristof, was you have these official photographers, you know they're going to get the moments. Does that open you guys up creatively? Are you going in with the mindset like, okay, I don't need all of these quote unquote big moments. I can kind of go off and do my own thing. Or are you still like, where does your mind fall as far as what photos do I have to get to have myself stand out? What are the lengths that you're going? You know, I've heard of photographers hiding in bushes to get photos, and you see some pretty crazy things on the side of these races. Can you talk a little bit of like, take us down into the depths?
Here's the thing, as an independent photographer, you're sort of competing with the big agencies, and the big agencies get all the access in the race. Me personally, I'm at the biggest races, the one-day races and the smaller stage races, I'm on a motorbike. But like for the Grand Tours, I'm not, because there's more and more focus on safety, which gets more and more motorbikes are getting thrown out of the races. So less and less photographers are allowed to be in the race, which means like for me, I'm covering the Grand Tours from my car. I actually cover the 200 or the 250 kilometers from my car, stop somewhere in between, then go on and hope to make the finish. So that's a huge difference than somebody from the big agencies that are in the race all the time and can only shoot from that perspective. And I think it's extremely important that you differentiate. I cannot compete with them because they're faster. There's always 2, 3, 4 of them at a certain race. I'm usually by myself or with one assistant. So it differs immensely. As a photographer, I need to give something different. I have to either give quality. If I shoot an action picture, I prefer one great picture instead of 10 mediocre ones. So I'll just wait for that one unique shot to pop up in front of me, which is always a big gamble. So it frees me up, yes, because the finish line shot, I know the big agencies will have that, and even my clients can get to those pictures easily and more rapidly than they get it from me. So if I can shoot the finish from a different angle, then that's more like a magazine shot. In magazines, they're more interested maybe in those kind of shots instead of the traditional newspaper shots that has a head-on finish victory shot or something like that. So I try to do something different. Don't always succeed though, because there's lots of restrictions going on in cycling races. It gets harder and harder because there's getting more and more creative people in there as well in the game, I must admit.
You mentioned that you're in your own car. Are you driving the car? And how much advanced recon do you do to figure out routes? I mean, there must be roadblocks and stuff like that. Do you ever get stuck up against a roadblock?
Yes, often. But that's the experience. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot of adrenaline. Like the last Grand Tour I did was the Tour of Spain, the Vuelta de España. And the Vuelta started in Portugal and ended in Madrid. So I flew into Madrid, rented the car for 3.5 weeks, because that's how long, it's almost a month, that one race. And I've rolled 7,000 kilometers doing so. So there's no way I can physically do a recon of the race, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. There's more and more apps that also the riders use and the teams use to do sort of a recon of the stage. So the roads and the towns. And now more and more, I find colleagues at exactly the same spot over a 200-kilometer course. I will find my colleagues on 3 separate occasions. On that course, we'll take similar pictures because we all preview it online. So there is preparation, but it's online and it's intuitively. But there's no time to do a 7,000-kilometer pre-recon ride in the weeks before.
Now, Kristof, you've mentioned that the entire sport and game and photographing it has changed in the years. I mean, you photographed your first race, was it La Flèche in 2003? How has everything changed since then? I mean, with social media now, and a lot more people are taking their own photos. They have their own creative teams. They have people following them. We have GoPros mounted to bikes. How has your approach changed? Has it evolved because of how the industry itself has evolved, or have you kind of taken your own path?
I'm not sure how to answer this because it does influence a lot of how I work or what is relevant. And it's sometimes extremely frustrating because I'm just a photographer. I come out of a film and video background, but I'm focused 100% on photography now. And a lot of the young guys, kids coming in, I'm 53, by the way, just to give you an idea. It could be my kids. They come in and they're amazing. They shoot pictures, they shoot video, they make content, they edit it, they put music on it, and it's all in a couple of hours. And I'm like, geez, I'm no longer built for this. But at the same time, I focus on the storytelling because with my film background, I went to film school. The storytelling has always been one of my main drivers. I want to document stories either in one picture or a series of pictures, but that's what I try to focus on.
So you weren't shooting professionally when you started?
In 2003, as you mentioned, I was just an amateur. I didn't even realize I was going to be a photographer because I was a video director at that time, and I shot it on film. I was just going with friends to a race, and it's just what we loved, and we had some drinks, so I had some fun. And by 2010 or 11, I moved to digital, and digital allowed me to grow faster as a photographer because I could shoot an experiment, check the results, and then change stuff accordingly. I was also maybe in the first wave just before the big social media. There was this platform called Flickr. It's still around. And I posted some pictures there. And by posting my pictures there was no Instagram, there was no Facebook. It sort of changed everything relatively immediately because all of a sudden, the whole world could check my pictures. Even the riders found my pictures, and I got jobs just showing my pictures online, which was unheard of just 5 years earlier. So yes, a lot has changed. The big focus now for a lot of clients is the social media output, is no longer the print output. And yeah, you got to adapt to those things for sure.
Hey, Kristof, who are your clients? How does that work? And it's different from the agency photographer's perspective, they're employed by these big creative agencies, have to get the photographs right off the bat to the internet and to the press releases. But how does it work for you? What are the economics of a freelance photographer?
Well, that's another thing that changed a lot because early on I was working for a lot of cycling dedicated magazines worldwide. I think I had like 10 or 12 magazines that printed my pictures, so I could easily live from that. And then I had some commercial clients on top, cycling brands mainly. But that changed a lot because print went dead and online business didn't follow up at the same level that print used to pay. So my business model changed dramatically in the last 5 years because now I only have 2 committed magazines and 2 others that regularly show my work. So that no longer is a viable output for my work. So these days, brands sort of came in, and I specifically work for brands. The biggest is Red Bull, especially now that they own one of the bigger teams in cycling and they sponsor a few specific high-profile riders. They come in and pay a lot of what I need to be able to do this. Then all kinds of cycling brands are now becoming more and more important just to be able to sustain an income. And now with the book coming out, it's for me a new direction to become more independent, hopefully. I also started finally to put out prints via my website. I didn't do that for like 10, 15 years. I had a lot of demand and I thought it was way too much. I was traveling all the time. I always wanted the quality to be top notch. But now I started doing that with partners. And so that's another side of economics that allows me to be more independent. Because brands also, I have to focus specifically on their products during a race, obviously.
Right.
But if I can work more with books and prints, that allows me to get a little bit more distance from having to shoot specific riders or specific teams.
Right. It's a good point.
It's still like a big mixture right now.
Now, at risk of getting too techie, we are a photography podcast and light. I mean, light is important. We have to pay attention to the technical aspect of photography. That at the core is what really draws us in. Phil, I've had the pleasure of photographing the streets with you, and I must say no one sees light like Phil Penman when you're out and he's taking mental notes. He's remembering what time it is, what day of the week, and what month, and where the light is hitting. So I want to talk about that aspect of the photos themselves. And Kristof, you went through a phase where lighting and using external lighting and artificial lighting to light these images, how light has shaped what you guys do from the creative side of things.
Yeah, it's very important to research the light. Like you can get very obsessed with the technical side of things, but if you don't have an eye for a photo, it's pretty much useless anyway. I do everything manually, even with the sports stuff. I always invested in good glass. So even when I was shooting back in the day with Nikons, I was one of the early adopters. We had the first digital cameras, but we were still using like the old Nikon glass. And then I kind of transitioned into Leica back in like 2004. And even today, like I have all this great glass available to me, but I'm looking for like the old stuff that's going to give me a look. And then it's just, like you said, looking at light. If you don't have that or an eye for composition, then it's all kind of irrelevant anyway. People get very obsessed with the technical, the look of the lens, with the picture as well. Like a lot of the time, it might be that you want it to be slightly out of focus because it might have more of like an emotional resonance with the viewer that's looking at it. Like everything's not so perfect. These are things that I'm looking for when I'm doing my pictures. And I think like you can see this in the book, like it's a beautiful book. One of the images that stands out to me is you've got a picture shot really low angle, shooting for a wheel as the bike's moving and you're framing another cyclist in the background and it's not perfectly sharp. And I think you get way more from that shot than if it was.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, I've learned to become less technical and go more in a sort of intuitive phase when it comes to covering races or covering speed, because it's one of the things that makes the capturing of this sport stand out. We have to be able to capture the speed. Speed is such an important aspect. And one of the ways to do this is to blur images sometimes with motion blur and allow for slow shutters to get at least a feel for what speeds these guys are racing at. Also, Derek, you mentioned how I came from artificial light covering race photos is exactly how I was able to differentiate myself. For me, it was pure experiments. I was completely obsessed in that period in the 2010 somewhere to skill myself in flash photography. And like many people, I was completely obsessed with strobist lights. I think at B&H, they had these strobist sets, I remember. So that meant just having flashes which you can trigger off camera. Because I found the on-flash camera pictures were so dull at the time that I really wanted to sort of try and what can I achieve if I put the light somewhere else than is traditional in this sport. I remember being completely obsessed with capturing light and using flash or natural light, and I even dreamt of these things. It was almost unhealthy, but I think it's a phase you need to go through. If you really want to commit as a photographer or any skilled artist, you need to get your basics down and dialed in at a subconscious level. So that when something happens, and everything in our sport happens so fast that you intuitively have to get your settings right, your framing right, and it has to be very natural to you. You can only achieve that by your 10,000 hours of trying. Sometimes I get called an artist, and I'm like, well, I don't achieve to be an artist. The best thing I achieve to be is to be as good as possible in what I do. So if you find that artistry, all right. But for me, I love to be a skilled person. That's the compliment, because that relates to the hours that I've put in and the things that I see in my head. I'm sort of able to translate that into a photograph. That's because of all the hours and hours and hours that I've tried in my head and in reality.
I think you see it in your work. You can tell when a photographer's put in the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Phil, I didn't know your work, but obviously before this podcast, I checked. And one thing that immediately stood out was, yeah, this guy understands light and composition. And with that, storytelling. That's what I relate to. That's what I can understand. And as a craftsman or as a photographer, you have to sort of get all that dialed in.
I think it's being humble with your work as well, because a lot of people, especially today, they think they're like the hot shit. For me, the moment that someone starts thinking that they are the best or whatever, your career is over, because you're never going to push yourself any further. I find it very inspiring to watch some of these younger photographers like you brought up, where they're putting in the work. You can see it. They realize the social aspect of it. There's something that's missing with that as well, is life experience. So a camera is just capturing who you are as a person. And if you haven't had those knocks in your life yet, that comes out in your work as well.
I completely relate to what you're saying right now. That's maybe why I relate so well to top level athletes. And I recognize a lot of what they're doing because I was in a phase in my life earlier, especially one specific period in my life, 2, 3, 4 years, completely obsessed. But if you're not, then you won't be able to get there. So I recognize that in the athletes.
I've been really, really fortunate. In my position when I was cycling, I got to watch Evelyn Stevens. Evelyn got into the sport. Within 1.5 years, she went from being a beginner in Central Park to riding in the World Championships. And you kind of see the work that they put in. And then Kristen Faulkner, who just won the gold medal. You know, I'm proud to say that I used to sell her jerseys when I was at Castelli. And then my own teammate, 20-year-old kid, Kyle Murphy, who I used to ride with, we were on the same team, and he became the US national champion. It's great to watch when you've got someone who's young, who's willing to put in the work. You can see that they've got talent, and then you can see it pay off. When he won the national championship, I was like, holy shit. And then going back to like Team Sky days, I remember I used to get up early every morning, primarily because of jet lag. But I used to watch Theo Gegenhuis, this young British kid, and he would come down every morning. He would be the first one down in the gym, putting in the work. And then I remember I was photographing him on the table, getting the massage. And I said I was in New York. And he said, oh, I owe a friend of mine, Matt Seaton, everything. He got me into this. He kind of drove me the way. And then to watch Teo win the Giro d'Italia, one of the biggest races in the world, I think it was like a year after that. And I sent him a message. And what's great was, even though at the time he was the biggest cyclist in the world, having won that race, they still take the time to say, thanks so much, really appreciate you saying that. And it's like, they're still humble. That's what I like about some of these people.
And the nicest thing is, they're so inspiring. Watching an athlete put in all the work, I feel inspired myself and extremely privileged to be in the same room, just capturing it. And I love to be a fly on the wall, just capturing what they're doing. And again, it's that hard work. If you can show that to the world, and especially with the social media, if you can capture those moments, for them, it's also an absolute plus. One of the several things that's unique about cycling, it's still an extremely accessible sport. It's open to the public throughout the course. You can go to a start and you can actually get a jersey signed. You can have a picture with them a lot of the time. If you don't go to Tour de France or the biggest races in the world, because that's where access is more limited, but at all the other races, you can just walk up to them and they're extremely accessible. When I started out, that enabled me to actually do portrait sessions with them at the start places of races. And that's how I got noticed, because I did these high profile riders and I was able to shoot portraits right there 15, 20 minutes before they went for a race. And that accessibility and humility makes this sport so fantastic. I love it.
It's great that they haven't been burnt yet, because the money isn't in the sport as much as...
But it's coming, it's coming.
Yeah, you know, and it's probably a good thing. Like, I think the average salary for a cyclist was like $30,000 a year. I'm not going to name names, but like some of the teams, what they would do is that you'd get like I think it was 65, 70,000. But then they would turn around to you and say, that bike you're riding and those clothes, you owe me for that.
Ooh.
So they figured out a way to get around that low salary. So you might get paid 70, but then you owe the team 20. I was just remembering something when you said like dedication. I was in the team Sky car and we were they were doing time trial training, which is basically where you've got like 5, 6 guys literally like 1 inch behind each other. And they're going down this descent. And the guy who's driving the car points at the speedometer. And they're doing 50 miles per hour down a descent, 1 inch behind each other in tandem. And you just realize, holy shit, if one of them makes a mistake right now, there's probably a good chance that a couple of them are going to die. You watch this dedication and having that mindset to do that, that's what separates these guys.
Wow. Just the passion. I could hear it in you guys' voices. I'm like, Phil, you want to get back on a bike right now, don't you?
It kills me. It kills me, man. After I broke my hip, that's the crazy thing. I crashed at 50 miles in races where people thought you were dead, but it was literally a dog that took me out, and it took me 2 years to recover from that. And in all honesty, cycling, it's a job. Like even at local level, it's a job. I was doing anywhere from like 300 to 500 miles a week training, I'd say. And with what I do for work now, it's just not practical. And I'm one of these people where it's like, you're all in or you're not. I miss it.
It's an extremely dangerous sport. I've been close to a lot of accidents and actually some deaths as well. And it's life-changing. It's horrible. Yeah, it's another aspect of this sport that makes it so unique. It is life-threatening at times.
Yeah, not to that point, but it's incredible to photograph as a sport because you never know what's going to happen. The suffering, like watching these guys suffer on the bike, it makes for great pictures. They're all in. They're all in, these guys.
Wow, such a fascinating conversation, but this seems like a great time to take a short break. So why don't we stand up, stretch, shake it out, and if you're already standing, have a seat. And when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Phil Penman and Ramon. Stay tuned.
When space is limited and you need to light your scene, Godox has expanded their lighting solutions to include flexible LED light mats in 5 sizes. Unlike traditional LED panels, these ultra-thin, flexible mats can be bent and folded to fit into tight spaces while maintaining valuable features such as an expanded CCT range, 0 to 100% dimming, special effects, and high color fidelity. These versatile mats come in 1x2, 2x2, 1x4, 2x4, and 4x4 foot sizes so they can adapt to any configuration, bringing power and flexibility to any set. Head on over to bnh.com for more information about the Godox flexible LED light mats or use the link in our podcast show notes.
And we are back with Phil Penman and Kristof Ramon. Now, earlier we had talked about communication. And when you think about cycling, it's an international sport. Whether somebody has an accent, a dialect, speaking different languages altogether. I'm going to tee this up for either one of you, whoever wants to jump on this one. But when we talk about communicating with riders, with teams, communication can, I guess, be tricky at times. So how do you guys handle building rapport, communicating with riders and their teams across so many different language barriers?
Usually, English-speaking people, whether they come from Britain or Australia or the other languages, not a lot of those colleagues come in and try to speak a different language, either to speak French or to speak Spanish, which means you're cutting yourself off from a lot of the riders because the Italians and the Spanish and a lot of the French won't speak English. So if your intention is to go and work in an international sport like cycling, I think it's a good thing to start learning another language. You don't have to master it. People can appreciate the fact that you're trying. So I think language skills are extremely important, but as important as people skills, which is even more important. On the other hand, over the past 10 years, ever since the introduction of Team Sky specifically, cycling has become more and more Anglo. The first language in cycling has shifted from French to English.
The English, it was always a big cycling place, but they never really had the riders. You know, I remember when Bradley was one of the only British cyclists in the Tour, and I believe it was the Olympics where the British were actually like, well, how are we going to win some Olympic medals? And they looked at all the sports and they figured out, well, where can we best place our money, invest it in a sport to win the most gold medals? And they knew it was either gymnastics or cycling. So they put a lot of money into cycling and they won a lot of medals that year. I think it's the London Olympics. And then all of a sudden, like you had David Brailsford, who was like the top guy at Team Sky. He was with the British team as well for the Olympics. And all of a sudden, like all these great British cyclists started coming out. And then you had Team Sky, the most funded pro cycling team. And everyone used to complain about them because they were doing things that, you know, a lot of the other teams didn't have. Like they brought certain coaches in. I think they were using like Australian swimming coaches and just saying, what are you guys doing? You're doing it all wrong. All of a sudden, everything started shifting. It's a huge sport worldwide. The joke over here was like soccer. No one ever really took that seriously. And now all of a sudden, it's like one of the top 3 sports in America. You know, it's like, no, the rest of the world have been playing this for a long, long time. You just woke it up to the fact because someone came and put a ton of money into advertising it.
You're touching on a very important thing in cycling as well. And again, as a photographer, as somebody who documents the sport, it's extremely important to know that this is a sport that has an extremely rich history. It's been documented since 1890 somewhere.
Wow.
And the races that we do now, I think we're at the 112th edition of the Tour de France or something. And all of them have been documented. And to be honest, it's one of the things that really drew me in were the old photographs of the 30s, 40s, 50s, up until the 70s, 80s. It's like, wow, they were amazing. And they pull you in, even more than video or film at the time. So it's extremely traditional.
Yeah.
So when this team came in, Team Sky, and they changed things, specifically the way things were done. For me, it triggered something. I was fascinated with it. I was like, wow. I loved the fact that Anglo-Saxon influences were becoming so important to this very traditional European sport. I think my first shoot with Team Sky was already 2011, 2012. because I was drawn to them. That's the thing also as a photographer. I was a beginning photographer at that time. And the nice thing is I was already 38 years old, so I wasn't that young anymore. I already had some experience, and it helped me to sort of know that I have to pursue stuff myself. I don't have to let stuff happen to become a cycling photographer. No, I have to pursue it. So I was in Mallorca. I just contacted the team and said, hey, I'm here. Can I follow you on a training ride? They said yes, because they were a new team. And it's super fascinating to be there at the birth of something new. Again, very privileged. And you have to sort of try it and document it. But also knowing this rich history, what is the importance of this British team here? Why is it interesting to shoot them, follow them on a training ride? Because it's now so different than what these other teams are doing. It's not extremely different, but still, it's like the details and the way they handle things.
Was it
And
marginal gains? I think it was like marginal gains. It was like even just the clothing side, which I was involved in. We were putting in tons of time into the wind tunnel to develop these kits for these guys in collaboration with the team, telling us what they wanted. And no one else was really doing that.
nobody was doing it. Nobody.
We had a particular time trial kit that the UCI actually tried to ban. The joke was you would have these fancy kits and you're like, if you wear this, you'll be X faster. But what they didn't realize was the gains never really kicked in unless you were able to hold 30 miles per hour. The average person, they're not going to be able to do that. But if you're a pro tour cyclist, you can hold 30 miles per hour in a time trial and it's going to be a huge gain. So all of a sudden, like we'd have guys who'd be putting in a minute over their competitors.
Which is huge.
Oh, it's like unbelievable gain. And so the UCI tried to ban one of our kits. Also, what's kind of interesting, especially in the US, is cycling has become the new golf. When I used to race local, everyone in cycling was like a hedge fund guy or a finance. And if you were a broker or you worked for a finance company and you wanted to get access to that guy, you know, the global head of your company, in real life, you would never get access to that person. And now all of a sudden you're on a 5-hour bike ride with the guy, you know? So I would ride in the mornings with like some of the most powerful players on the planet. It was like the tech of cycling, the hard work, the competitiveness. It attracts a certain kind. And then it was the networking as well. So it made the sport grow even more.
Wow.
That's so interesting.
That's a great point, Phil, because I'm thinking there and I'm like, yeah, golf is something you go out and do with business associates, but you're drinking liquor and you're
It's a
riding
whole
a cart
day.
and it's a whole day. This doesn't sound like fun going out, and I don't want to go on a business meeting on a 50-mile ride. That sounds grueling. I'm over here looking at Kristof's pictures and I'm like, I don't want any part of this.
Yeah, they love it.
Yeah, at the same time, it's like a really, really good opportunity to show yourself. If you're targeting a manager and you sort of go with them up a climb for like half an hour, and like in the last 20 minutes, you go like, well, see you on top, and you just up on top, you'll make an impression on that guy for sure. Because he knows how hard it is, but then you have to be able to do that too.
Yeah.
It's the social aspect of the sport. Again, the sport is also much wider, and bringing it all back to photography, maybe. I focus mainly on the racing and the top tier racing events in the world. But a lot of the times I go shoot with guys that just love cycling, and I love to cycle myself and be out and get healthy and be very social. And it's not that competitive, but it's extremely rewarding. And as a photographer, a lot of my clients have a need for these shots so I can earn shooting not pro racing. And with all the skills I know from capturing bikes and racing and angles and stuff like that, I can help a brand give them those pictures. So even the racing stuff helps me to shoot the more common stuff that regular people do by riding bikes. So
Yeah.
the two are connected.
I think the networking as well. Like,
Yeah.
I met all these people. Like, at the time, I kind of knocked it because of what I was doing. But then I quit the cycling, and all of a sudden, I had this huge network of people. I picked up all the big pharmaceutical gigs, shooting commercial work because of the cycling network that I was in. The great thing about the bike was people never gave a shit about who you were, as long as you were a good cyclist. At the time, I was doing like paparazzi work, right? I was a celebrity photographer. In normal day, if you told someone that that's what you did for a living, you'd be like scum, right? I hate you. But because you're anonymous, you're wearing a bike kit and a helmet, and you're good at cycling, they would respect you because of that. It's the great equalizer. That's what I loved about it.
Agreed. Get on your bikes, guys. Get on your bikes.
Yeah, really.
I'm like, wait, I got to rent a city
Especially
bike.
if you want to be in finance and you want to be a hedge fund manager.
I know. Is that how I got to get rich? I got to learn how to race.
Seriously.
Yep.
It's interesting. Kristof, I want to come back to the book and just projects in general and a little bit about that process. When did the idea for this project come about, and when did you really start putting the pieces together, and how did you go about that?
When I was in film school, one of my big goals was at some point I wanted to make a film. I never succeeded. The thing is with a film is like you need a lot of money and a lot of people. The nice thing and the beauty about photography is if you have an idea, if you have a vision, you can pick up a camera and shoot it. You can make it on your own without too much investment and get that vision across the way you want it. So as soon as I shifted from being a video director to this cycling photography thing, I really love it. And it's all new and fresh and exciting. I don't want to make a movie anymore. At some point, I want to make a book. So it started 12 to 15 years ago. But reality is like a different thing. The thing is, I wanted to do it with a publisher. I printed a small book, which was more like a showcasing thing to get clients and to get my name across and to get to riders and teams. I made a little book, but that was on my own. But I really wanted to make a standout coffee table book. I think it was about 5 years ago, I got approached by Lawrence Publishing, and they were interested in my work. And I was like, great, I've been thinking about it for a long time. But now with you guys behind me, I can actually push for it. But then again, a lot of practical things happened with the company itself. It got into a bigger company, and then Corona hit. So the difficulty was actually for me as a photographer. I asked them, like, hey, what kind of book you think the book needs to be about? And they were like, well, your cycling, your photography. It's like, that's way too wide. I need direction. I need confinement to sort of focus. And by the time I know so many people, like one of my good friends in cycling is a British cycling commentator, Matt Rendell. He's also a very established cycling writer, author himself. And I knew immediately, like, I have to draw Matt in. I want him in because he's such a good writer, storyteller, and I'm not that good with words. And when I got him in and I told him about my dilemma, he said, well, Kristof, it's simple. You need to show what you're passionate about and find a theme you can center it around. And pretty soon after that, I knew that one of the big things that draws me visually and emotionally is the suffering. And as soon as the team was there, I knew more or less like, hey, I can bring that together. Because together with the suffering, sometimes we go through vistas that are just stunning. When you're at 3,000 meters of altitude on a glorious day, it's beautiful. But at the same time, there's all this underlying work that was done before. If you want to make a book, you have to find a theme that connects it all. And that's what I found 5 years ago. And then it was just a process of eliminating 15 years of work. And it's a super hard process.
Did you curate it yourself as well?
Yes. I think that's where my film background and especially my video background helps, because I used to work for television and we go out and I have 2 or 3 30-minute cassettes and you have to edit that into 5-6 minute reportages. Like, no, what's the essence? What do we need? And I've done that for 12 years. So with the book, it's similar. Actually, photography is similar. In a race, I shoot 1,000, 2,000 pictures. I only show 50 max.
I think that's an important point for a lot of people. They don't realize that that's how it works.
Yeah.
You don't go out and take one picture. There's a lot of stuff that you don't see.
And you will never get to see. Because I had a lot of clients like, oh, let me see everything you got. I'm like, no, I'm not showing you that. No way I'm going to
Well,
show
they
you
don't
that.
trust us anymore. That's the
Yeah.
problem. I've had that where a photographer's worked for a client and they'll give them like 10 images. And the thing is, you're seeing it from a photography point of view, but there's something that the client might want to be showing, something to do with their product that you're not going to know. And then the photographer will hold those images back. And then, of course, the client sees them and goes, well, why didn't you submit this? This is exactly what we're looking for. And it's caused this distrust now of photographers.
Wow.
And I remember I did a job where we shot, I think, 700 images of the same picture. And it was two celebrities holding a bottle of Heineken. But there was something about the facial expressions that they wanted. And after that, I just knew that these clients are going to want to see everything. It's just the way that it's become now.
So that's now a stipulation in the contracts?
Like the pharma stuff that I did, they'd want to see everything. I remember once we shot 4,000 pictures of the same frame and they want every single one. A lot of the time it's because they don't actually know what they want until they see it.
Exactly. And that is why I think it's extremely important if you have these high commercial shoots, and Phil, you're much more accustomed to those than I am. I need a filter in between me and that client if they want that. Because I am used to going through pictures at lightning fast speeds. I know what I don't want, and I know what I will never use, and I know pictures when I see them that are valuable. So if you shoot huge batches of pictures and the client wants to see everything, then I don't want to be the person showing it to them. You need somebody else to be an in-between and to mark pictures. Otherwise, I won't be able to be creative, or I'll just, I would hate that process.
Right. It's a psychological block. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's funny is sometimes they don't realize the technical stuff that's going into it. Like I had one that's hilarious where we were shooting live and we were streaming it to a website. The technology didn't actually exist. I paid a hacker to hack Capture One. Literally, the tech hadn't even come out. We were doing a shoot on a moving truck, streaming from a camera, 30-foot tethering cable to a laptop, Wi-Fiing to a website so that the client could see the images popping up. And they're at a coffee shop in like Minneapolis, right? And I'm in like frame 4,000 and they're like, oh, well, we only have 3,900. Is there any way you can speed it up? And I said, you know what? I'll phone up T-Mobile and I'll see if they can increase the internet speed for the city and see if that's possible. It's like, wake up. Do you know what technology is going on right now? Even Apple haven't done this yet. You're just dealing with these clients. They're just so focused on their image and what they want.
Here's the reality, of course. As successful sports photographers or cycling photographers, in my case, I do need to work with clients from time to time. But I also need my own projects. I need my own pictures to be boss of how I shoot stuff for myself.
Right.
That's the difficult thing for me personally. I'm not good at people telling me to shoot a certain way, because if you booked me, you know my work, you probably know what you're going to get. And the only way you're going to get it is by allowing me to do my thing. I was very insecure about that when I started out as a cycling photographer. I always had this, I'm not really a cycling photographer. The imposter syndrome, obviously. It didn't took too long before I was like, no, I need to have my own creative path. You have to have your own voice. You have to have your own stamp on things.
That's the beauty of your book, though. I'm on my third book now, and it's like I realized that there's the stuff that you have to put out there for the client and then the social media. So a lot of the time, the clients will come to you and say, oh, we really love your work, your style. But really what they mean is we like your style and we want to mold it into our style somehow.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, hang on, why didn't you just say that to begin with? But the beauty of your book is you can tell that that's who you are because you get to present exactly what you want to show us.
You're right, because I've shown pictures in there that people wouldn't expect. They never knew the pictures. They were never on my social media, because there's a lot of pictures in the book that are more personal to me and that I find interesting. That's also something we tried. We spoke a lot about the pictures and got the stories out. Why did I like that picture? And that's what in the little captions are with each picture. I think it's important to sort of give that information to show like, hey, this happened. And sometimes it's more philosophical. Sometimes it's just, I love this picture because it reminds me of something in the past or something cultural or music or art. And sometimes it's something because a personal story I had with a specific rider or a team member or just the mood. I have one picture, I think it's the closing picture of my book. And it's just two mechanics working, and it's already dark, but you can still see the mountains just slightly and the snow on top of the mountains. And they are working in the back of a truck, finishing the bikes to be ready again for tomorrow. I love that picture because it's so relating to how I see cycling. And I know these guys and I love these guys. And so it's so nice to get that picture in there as well, to show them and to show the bigger community of cycling. And I think that's important. Somebody else would have maybe never chosen that picture because they don't relate to it the way I do.
Even the bottles being filled, like people don't realize the amount of work that goes on behind. Like a lot of people don't realize that because they don't want to sleep on the hotel mattresses, the team will have their own mattresses and they have to transport mattresses to each hotel. So there's like this carnival. There's constantly moving.
Yeah.
The Team Sky hotels, they literally rebrand the hotel to Team Sky.
Every day.
Yeah.
Wow.
For 25 days in a row, they go to a different hotel, change the mattresses, have their own cook work in their own kitchen because the kitchen comes along and stuff like that. Again, if we can document this, it's just the way the sport evolves, and it's nice for us to be able to capture it and show it. And that's one of my biggest motivations is in 10, 20, 30 years' time, maybe people can look back at this and go like, look what they did. Look how they prepped their meals. Look how they slept. Look how they prepared for the race. Because that's the pictures I love, looking back at the pictures from the 50s, 60s, 70s.
A lot of sports don't show that.
Yeah.
It's cycling, you still have access to it. But like with a lot of other sports, you don't get access to that. It's kind of interesting with like the soccer, like the Premiership. Now, a lot of the teams themselves are doing is they're shooting all the behind stuff themselves because they realize there's an appetite for this stuff and it was never really being documented before because it's very hard for a team to let someone else in.
Well, you guys obviously have books out. You have the experience, but the work is inspiring. And Kristof, you said it earlier, it's an open sport. Really. I mean, this is something that you can go to, maybe not the biggest races, but there's smaller races that you can go to and just pop up. And if I want to become the next Phil Penman, the next Ramon, how does one start that journey as a photographer?
Exactly as you're saying. It's like, just show up. Actually, show up, because I'm getting emails every so many weeks. It's like, hey, either I or my kid wants to be this photographer, and can you help them, give them some tips? I'm like, I've never seen you. Why aren't you at the races? I mean, just show up. And as you say, it doesn't have to be the biggest races, but go and exercise at the smaller races and the events. Become familiar with the speed of them racing, or find your angle at which you can make portraits or candid shots or whatever you want to do. It's a good thing to build up, because you cannot show up to a team and say, hey, I want to be your team photographer. Okay, show me what you've done. And like, well, this is what I want to do. Like, okay, stop right there. Like, no, show me what you did already. So build something and then build up further from there.
Get the basics right. A lot of photographers, they want to be where Ramon is, but it's like, they can't even show up on time, or they look a mess. And it's just like small little details. Like I always discovered that the best thing was just be easy to work with.
Yeah.
It's not about you. It's a team. Like even doing a book, it's a team. Think about that. Just get that right. Make it easy for them. I've seen it where so many photographers have lost gigs and they don't even realize that they lost it, because the client is not going to tell you that they're not going to hire you again. But it's just like you might say the wrong thing, or you're too hard to work with.
Or too obnoxious, because you're in a high focused area at a lot of the time. So these people don't need somebody that needs attention.
Interesting.
My biggest aim always is to be as invisible as possible. Because if you're on a team bus where there's 12 people before a race getting ready, there's no space for me to work if I'm the one taking up all the space. So I'm making myself as small as possible. Make yourself small.
Interesting. And then getting credentialed when you have earned the respect, when you have put in the time and the work, Is it hard to get credentialed? Is this one of those sports that it's a small amount of credentialed photographers?
Yeah, I get credentials for all the big races and the world championships and the championship. The only way to do it these days is if you have an official press card.
Okay.
And in Belgium specifically, it's pretty hard to get. So there's two ways. Either you start working for a big agency and they arrange it for you because you are an employee for this big news agency that covers the sport. And then if you do that for a couple of years and then you move on, become independent, you might be able to sort of take your press card along because you already have it. You have proven yourself. And then there's a harder way of doing it is just start doing it without credentials, getting your work published, proving that before a commission, and hopefully be awarded a press card because the bigger deal of your income is now dependent on these pictures. And that's pretty hard to do.
And what are you guys doing with the pictures? Are you shopping these out to agencies, to teams? Are you showing people? How are you guys getting the work out there, especially on the front end of the career where you don't have the name behind you?
That's where social media now is a big thing. It's the obvious way to profile yourself more generally. I mean, I've seen so many fantastic photographers popping up, and they all started being Instagram photographers. I'm getting scared, actually. There's some really, really good people out there right now. The good thing for me is I have the contacts, I have the experience, and I might not be as diverse as the new generation. But
Media is changing, right? Now it's all about podcasts. The media, they've kind of blown themselves up, unfortunately. It's sad to watch because I've been in it most of my life, but you got to be able to adapt. You know, you look at these Apple events, most of the people now, they're like people that have like influencer channels. You know, Marquez Brownlee, I have so much respect for that guy. Like he built that. And it's like when someone like Tim Cook is saying, Marquez Brownlee said this about our product, you know that things have changed. So when I was growing up, you had to go through the gatekeepers, you pitch your work. Now it's like you can become bigger than them. If you are putting in the work, you're doing the social stuff, and you amass an audience of, say, 500,000 followers, you're bigger than any of their publications are anyway. You're reaching more people than them. And we're trying to reach people. Look at Formula One. It didn't take off in America until Netflix did a series, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You just got to adapt to the new media.
it's one of those skills that I'm not as savvy, obviously, as these kids. They're sort of brought up with it. They breathe it. They understand it intuitively, which I don't. So that's one of the skills you really, really need to have these days.
It's scary. I think they did a test where they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And most people say, I want to be an influencer.
We're in trouble.
And we come from an era where that was like, it's not a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've talked about it a bunch today in this conversation about how readily available all of this is. And technology is one of the things that has made it so easy for anybody to kind of just pick up and do their thing. All it really takes is a good idea or just the stick-to-itiveness to stay with something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things now that you're on it, is like sometimes after the big races, I put my favorite pictures out on Instagram. And like now I get so many requests for, can I have this picture to put on my wall? So now with all the technology there's here, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do this 10 years ago, but now I can bring them to my website and say like, hey, yeah, there's prints. So now you can get it. So for me, it's sort of another way to tap into that new technology and be able to sort of make a living out of that. Because when print media is disappearing, it's simply disappearing from my paycheck. This is another way to sort of compensate for the loss I have here. It's like to get into this technology and be able to send out those art prints to the people that actually want it. So it helped a lot. I have to adapt. I cannot look at it and go like, not for me. You have to jump in.
Now, on the technical side, as far as settings are concerned, Phil, you know our good buddy Mark DePaula, he's another of the cycling world people here. But I remember when I learned that a lot of his photos, it's like he shoots them wide open on super fast glass, razor thin depth of field, and he doesn't bother with focusing. He just kind of gets in the zone and rips, and the model's in focus and out of focus. It's his look. Yeah. How do you guys approach? I mean, you guys both have such a feeling to your images. I don't look at your images and, like you said earlier, Phil, there's shots of Kristof's where I'm like, okay, it's not a technically sound, but it has every bit of feeling. I love this image. I feel like I'm there. I feel like I'm going to get run over any moment. How do you guys approach the technical aspect, being that it's kind of an aside where the emotion takes precedent in your images?
I think that was the point in the first place, that it's not about the technical part. We made it about the technical part. A picture is supposed to get some kind of emotional response. And I think some people become too obsessed with the technical part and they don't have the emotional part. For me, it's like I'm always looking for the things that are defective, like lens flare. Like when you look at a person in real life, to the edge of them, they're not in focus. All right. So if you want something to feel closer to real life, it's not all edge to edge sharpness. Everything is not in focus. Okay. So small things like that. So I do the same kind of as Mark, where I'm using like 75, 1.25 lenses, and I'm shooting it wide open because I want as much depth in the image as I can. It's a lot harder to do, but I feel that you get a much better result from it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you guys do with autofocusing? Are you manually
What's that?
focusing? Are you tracking? I was going to say.
Yeah. The thing is, I shoot guys coming down 70 kilometers an hour from a mountain, and I shoot it at 1.4. So,
Oof.
yeah, on a 50 millimeter lens. And so I have to rely on autofocus for that one.
Take advantage of it. That's the thing. It's like,
Yeah.
I see these people, they'll have these certain cameras and they'll be trying to do it manually. And I'm like, your camera has really good autofocus. Use it. Mine doesn't have autofocus. I don't have a choice.
And at the same time, we talked about in the beginning, it's about intuition. Your mechanical brain needs to adapt to your creative brain. There has to be a shortcut between those two. And sometimes I'll just flip the settings like really fast and like within 1 second, because somehow I feel like, no, I see this guy is now in that position. So maybe it might be better if I go a slow shutter. And then you have to sort of rip through your settings and change it. And also take the risk. I found it much more rewarding to actually technically take a risk, hoping for an exceptional picture, than to shoot at, let's say, f8 to make sure like I have it. Like, well, it's like a bit more of a boring picture for me than shooting it at 1.4.
I was going to ask you about that risk taking, because it's one thing me trying to do a panning shot on a food delivery worker in New York, and if I don't get it, nothing lost, nothing gained. But I mean, like you said, these guys are flying. The window of opportunity is small. The risk reward factor is just huge. I mean, are you going out there? Is there any time where you're just like, all right, a little less risk, I got to get this one?
Of course, yeah. Here's the thing. You sort of build it, especially when you Grand Tour, you have 21 stages. If it's pure on race photography, that's where you take the most amount of risk, technically, in capturing that exceptional picture. You sort of spread out the risk by making sure that they're going to go over a mountain range. They're going to go slow. So when they're going up at 20 kilometers an hour, then you can make sure you got a good picture. That means like the next time you see him like 50 kilometers further on, because you race to that next spot and you're just there in time, then you go like, okay, they're going to be much faster here, but I'm going to try it because I already have the shots I wanted from this guy. So I'm going to try it again, and maybe now with a lot more risk. So you build in certainties and you make sure a good percentage of my shots, I calculate risky shots. Sometimes it's gone horribly wrong and I couldn't provide the pictures to my clients, but sometimes it was huge rewards as well. And not just money-wise, but in the creative satisfaction you get from taking that risk and wanting to show it in this specific way. No risk, no real rewards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the technology has your back.
More and more.
We're not in the film days anymore. Definitely. Is there anything that you've thought when out photographing that this would make my life a lot easier? Is there anything from a technology standpoint that you would want to see in future iterations of cameras, or any type of gear that makes it
better waterproof?
That's exactly my thinking, because on the back of the motorbike, I've been freezing so many times. It got rained up on and stuff. It's like, well, actually, if I could just see better what I'm doing in those moments, or just not be so cold, then, well, that might help. The spring classics, they start end of February in Belgium, all the way up until April. But it can still snow and freeze. So you're on the back of the motorbike for 4 to 5 hours. So if your hands freeze, you're almost done. So sometimes the best kit you can have is good gloves. Or actually now there's gloves that have warming elements in them.
Yeah, you have them. There's a Belgian company that I used to use when I was racing, where they have it's electric battery in it.
Ecoy.
They're awesome.
Wow.
But I would love it if they made like a photography glove.
Yeah, with sensitive fingers, like instead of those thick. Yeah,
that would be great.
And also, if you're on the back of the motorbike, you're photographing with a helmet on. Imagine this. So you have to have a sort of an open helmet, but you want it to protect you as well in case you need it.
We're going to see a Nikon, Canon, Leica, Sony helmets coming to play soon.
Yeah. Or imagine this, technically. A visor in your helmet that helps you see what you're seeing in your digital monitor anyway on your camera.
Wow.
Or you can focus with your eyes instead of your fingers.
Oh, I've got that already.
Yeah, me not. I'm not.
Yeah. Elon's working on that.
Oh, okay, perfect then. Then that will be here next week, probably.
Yeah.
In his timeline.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
All right. We've been talking for a while. And before we let you guys go, I got to know, it's a grueling sport, grueling for the riders. What is the most grueling lengths you guys have gone to for an image in the cycling world?
Well, I can answer that. Every year, I probably have 10 of those shots that I don't have because I was limited physically to take that shot. And if you see pictures of me with riders in snow or completely soaked, that means I have to go through the same circumstances to be able to shoot that. And I remember one shoot specifically, it was also on Mallorca. I was shooting a race there and I got so cold that I couldn't continue anymore because I was seeing everything, but I just literally couldn't frame a picture. I couldn't lift my arms anymore. So grueling, because you see good pictures right in front of you. It's also in my book. It's my opening quote. The more horrible the conditions, the more epic the picture.
That sounds straight out of Phil Penman's book.
It's my opening quote because it's the reality for me. It's like, I hate it when it's like cold and wet, but at the same time I know, but if I'm able to shoot a picture, it probably will be good.
See, look at that. I feel like you guys are so aligned. It's like we're talking to the same person. Every time I hear one of you speak, I'm like, wait, that sounds exactly like the other one.
Slightly different accents, but
Yeah.
Messaging back channel.
Yeah.
You take this one, but say this.
I'm like, wait.
It's the Elon ship kicking in again.
Oh, yeah.
You guys already have the technology.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It's like every time, if it's raining, snowing, when everyone else is on the couch, you guys are
The
out.
good stuff.
That's when the good shots happen.
Yep.
Don't tell them. Edit that bit out, please.
Yeah.
That's off the record.
Yeah,
But I'm guessing if you're looking for comfort, then don't become a photographer.
Yeah.
exactly. If you like money, don't become a photographer.
That too, yeah.
Become a cyclist.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man. Well, Kristof, you have the book out. Where can we find the book? Where can we purchase?
Well, I do have more personal copies on my website, which is just kramon.be because I'm from Belgium, so I'm BE based. My book is there, my prints are there, or I guess you can also reach out via Instagram. And on Instagram, you can find me at Kramon_velophoto.
Perfect. And any projects in the works now that are you celebrating or are you on to the next?
Well, here's the thing. It's end of years and everybody's winding down. And after now 2 months of relative rest, I have to pick up the game again because I'm diving back into cyclocross, which is a variation of cycling that is basically all muddy and wet and cold. And I'll be shooting 9 races in less than 15 days.
Where is that happening?
In Europe,
Mm.
so it's basically cyclocross is very Belgian, Dutch based, but we have races in France and Spain as well coming
It's
up.
an excuse to drink good beer.
Well, I live in Belgium. I don't need an excuse.
Yeah.
And Phil, what's going on with you? I know you're traveling the world.
Yeah.
You guys are both on the road nonstop, but what do you have going on?
The next stop is Switzerland. I got to shoot. We're actually working on a town in Switzerland. I got to go and shoot the town, which is going to be made into an exhibition for later in the year. And then a lot of workshops again. It's constant. I think we're at London, Switzerland, probably Dubai, Tokyo, Paris, Austria. Like every month there's something planned. And then a lot of workshops in New York as well. So
Let me know when you come to Belgium, Phil.
yeah, definitely. I've been wanting to go get back there ever since I discovered good Trappist beer when I was 16 in Ghent.
That's young, but good for you.
Good point, yeah. So yeah, I'll be back.
Awesome. And Phil, the Instagram website, what do we got going on? Where can we get the best updates on you?
Probably the most current is on Instagram. The website for all the upcoming workshops, I put everything on there. So that's just philpenman.com, and then Instagram, just Phil Penman. So yeah, I'm pretty active on that. So you go check it out.
Awesome. Well, as you guys see, these two do not stop. They've actually been on stationary bikes the entire time we recorded this. That was one stipulation. Look at that. The heart rate didn't even go up.
You heard that?
Yeah. I just heard the whizzing.
Yeah.
No, but I want to thank you guys for joining us today. And of course, obviously, a huge thank you to all of our listeners for joining us today. If you are a fan of the show, but not yet a subscriber, please head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm your host, Derek Fosbender. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to Godox for sponsoring this week's episode.